Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about all uniques that have been released so far for 3.20. Now, if there's uniques that will be released after this video, I will pin them down in the comments, so definitely check that out. I also want to start out by saying that the uniques this league have been outstanding and absolutely insane. The skill balance has definitely been lacking over the last 2 leagues, but the new uniques they have been putting out definitely have not. And let's start it off with a banger. Oriath. So what this flask does is basically, while it's up, it gives you Explodey. We don't know how much this chance will go up. Is it going to go up to 35, 40, or is it only going to be like 20 to 30, which is my guess most likely. And it deals 1/10 of their maximum life as damage of a random element, which means it's technically worse than Profane Bloom, because Profane Bloom even gets buffed to 50%. However, when we're talking about something like a Pathfinder, don't forget that this actually scales with Flask Effect. As well as that, some builds really like that this is elemental and not chaos. For example, Omni builds. Crystallized Omniscience builds are the perfect fit for this item because it's global penetration and it doesn't really discriminate between cold, lightning, or fire. One thing I want to point out here, though, is that this doesn't necessarily have to go into an elemental build. A lot of people are talking about Omni and LE builds in general, but what we learned from Profane Bloom is that if the effect is strong enough, it doesn't really matter that much. Profane Bloom is chaos-based, and I know a ton of elemental builds that still run this. For example, a lot of cold builds, Profane Bloom is still way better than Herald of Ice. Or they have Herald of Ice and Profane Bloom, right? The more the merrier. I guess a small downside is that the base type is not the best unless you're Pathfinder. If you're Pathfinder, you're going to have this always up, and you can actually kind of count on the elemental resistances. But on other builds, you can't really rely on it. I guess it's nice to be elemental weakness capped overall. But yeah, some people were talking about it being a good base because it lasts so long and it has low charge count. But then again, if you're on a zoomer that kind of wants this kind of explodey effect, it's also an expensive unique, right? It's not like you're going to have it on League Start on worse builds, right? Then you're not really going to care about that too much. But overall, this item is insane. This was, I think, made by Steel Mage. Absolutely unbelievable that he got this into the game. They kind of removed more and more explodey from the game. And finally, it's back. Depending on how rare this is going to be a huge chase unique. Second flask, I think this was made by Ben. Now, this is Progenesis, and this flask is just on par with what we just had. So basically what this flask does is it is a amethyst base, and when hit during effect, 25% of life loss from damage taken occurs over 4 seconds instead. Now, a ton of people have kind of been comparing this to Petrified Blood. I just want to make it clear that people understand how much better this flask is. Obviously, you could use it both on top, but this does not need you to be low life. Petrified Blood is about letting you go low life to abuse stuff like Pain Attunement and then getting back your defenses from losing half your HP, right? But this flask, you can just be on full HP and use it and literally get 25% reduced damage taken. And once again, I have to remind you that this scales with Flask Effect. So for something like a Pathfinder, completely insane. A lot of Pathfinder buffs this league. What I want to mention here is 2 things in particular is if you have a lot of regen, this gets just better and better, right? So for example, if you're an Inquisitor with Pious Path, and I think the biggest one is if you have Slayer Overleech. Also, a small detail here, it's an Amethyst flask, right? And every build wants Chaos Res. Basically every build other than CI builds, which obviously this isn't for. You want that Chaos Res. You're probably not going to be capped, right? And the thing about Amethyst Flask usually is they have 35 out of 65 charges used, which means you exactly cannot activate them twice, making them very annoying to use against some bosses. But this flask also has reduced charges, so yeah, it's basically a dream come true. Completely bonkers. I wouldn't be surprised if we see this in almost every endgame build that needs a little bit of a tankiness boost. Next up, let's do Eternal Damnation. This Emmy has a hefty downside with -5 to all maximum resistances, but it also has gain additional elemental damage reduction equal to half your Chaos Res. Now, without any shenanigans, if we do the math here, basically we have -5 to all maximum resistances, which also counts for Chaos. So we can only get to 70 max res on Ellie, and we can only get to 70 Chaos Res. Now, the 30 res that is missing, right? The 30 that does come through is getting reduced by these 35% reduced elemental damage taken from the last line here. So if we do the math, it comes out to it being like you had 80.5% max res. So just on its own, this Emmy basically gives you 5.5% max res, or it's basically like that. However, it does work with some interesting things. The most obvious one, I think, is obviously Lore Weave, which basically makes it so your maximum resistances are always up to 78. And there's a lot more shenanigans with this. TLDR is, though, I think this Emmy is incredibly strong. However, it's going to be really hard to justify on softcore. The amulet slot nowadays is hyper competitive. You have Ashes of the Stars, you have Crystallized Omniscience, you have Strangle Grasp, you have Ol Natol's Vow that literally gives you a 7th link, right? So all I'm saying is that you better make this work in your favor a ton to justify what it does, at least on softcore. On hardcore, I think this could make for some incredibly tanky builds. Next up, let's talk about a jewel that doesn't get nearly as much attention as it should, which is Rational Doctrine. Now, this has two different effects, one around Consecrated Ground and one about Profane Ground. If your Strength is your highest attribute, you get Consecrated Ground, and if your Intelligence is the highest, you get Profane Ground. Now, the thing about this is if your Strength and your Intelligence is both at the same point, you should get both buffs, and it's not actually that hard to do unless you're somebody who's on the right side of the tree. Usually, if you're on the left side of the tree, maybe you will have to do some shenanigans. You have to get like one extra strength node or something like that. You can usually manipulate your rings and amulets with like catalysts, attribute catalysts to be exact. And while everybody knows what Consecrated Ground does, I don't think people realize just how good Profane Ground is. So just to point this out, Profane Ground means that enemies on Profane Ground get minus 10% resistances, and whenever an enemy gets hit on Profane Ground, it's like you have +1 base crit. All I'm saying is expect to see this jewel being played quite a bit in the right builds. This is going to be an insane upgrade. Some builds will even want it for the Consecrated Ground. You create Linger for 4 seconds, which is already really nice. You just have them around you constantly. The thing I want to point out, though, is it's probably not the best on an Inquisitor. For obvious reasons, you already have Consecrated Ground anyways. Then let's talk about a pair of gloves that I haven't really got my mind around just how crazy it is. I think this one is made by Gucci. Now, Entropic Devastation gives your critical strikes with spells inflict Impale, which is something that I wanted to do for a long time. It was never really possible. 50% increased effects of Impale inflicted by spells. So there used to be this meme build with Replica Heartbreaker, right? Which gives you 20% chance to impale on spell hit. You could do that twice. Then there was some alt qualities that could do this. Scratch all that. Now you get it just for free on every single crit, and it also has increased effect. And on top of that, you get Call of Steel. And on top of that, it's a unique, so you're going to be able to buy them and double corrupt them for some even better stuff. Like, I just don't know. I absolutely love these gloves, and I will most likely be playing something with them. I think physical spells got basically no love for a long time. If we think about stuff like Blade Vortex or BFBB or EK, there's just no way you're not converting to Elemental unless you go Poison, right? But just purely physical builds were just completely, there was just no reason to go for them. Now there's a reason. And we have a very powerful looking ring, Anathema, which basically makes it so your curse limit is equal to your maximum power charges. So at the very worst, basically you make it so instead of having one maximum curse, you now get 3. So this is sort of like a Dodra's Damning, right? If we remember, Dodra's Damning gives you +1 additional curse. And this basically gives you +2, just straight out of the gate. But then there's obviously more stuff to do with it. Now, I haven't really fully understood why a build would want more than 3, maybe 4 curses. Well, you could apply all curses at once. I don't really know how that would look like, why that would even be a thing. So this is definitely an interesting one to figure out. I would say this is one of those uniques that probably somebody's going to make a video about, and everybody's going to have an aha moment. But depending on how expensive it is, just for the +2 additional curse, it could be really strong on some poison or elemental dot builds. Then we have 3 unique jewels incoming. Fire Song. What this does is it gives you a little bit of fire res. Modifiers to ignite duration on you apply to all elemental ailments. So what this basically means is if you get, for example, 100% reduced duration of chill, you will also get every other ailment on top. So freeze, ignite, shock, and also all the alt ailments. Now, the problem with reduced ailment duration is that some enemies actually have increased duration. So even if you have 100%, some enemies will still be able to apply ailments to you. However, enter the lightning version of this jewel, which is chance to avoid being shocked, applies to all elemental ailments. And now we can see really how strong this jewel could be. Because this straight up means if you have a 100% chance to avoid shock, there's no ifs or buts, you're ailment immune. Now, I assume there's also going to be a cold version of this jewel, which is going to be the last one, which is reduced effect, right? So it used to be that 100% reduced effect of shock, for example, does not mean that you actually are immune to shock. It just means that the enemy has to hit for twice as much damage to shock for the same amount, right? So reduced effect was just not that good. However, this patch, they changed that. We changed monster-inflicted sources of chill and shock effect to be multiplicative rather than additive. This is to allow sources of reduced effect of ailments to be able to stack and provide immunity. This is something that I know quite a lot of people missed, but what this basically just means is that whenever the cold version of this comes out, it's probably going to be very close in terms of power level to Stormshroud. Also, this buffs Headhunter. You can literally get ailment immunity with 1 chance to avoid being shocked during flask effect roll. Yeah, Mageblood definitely needed the buff. Then we have Witchbane, which reads, when you kill an enemy affected by a non-aura hex, become immune to curses for the remaining hex duration. Now, while mapping, this should make you immune to curses, which is really nice. Now, there's a few questions here, though. The first one is, do you actually want to sacrifice a jewel slot for that? Because against bosses, this doesn't really do anything. You have to kill. So I'm not really sure what to think about this yet. And the second question is this good in stuff like, for example, Soul Mantle? And my short answer would be no, because it's just way too dangerous. Like, if you haven't killed recently, you're just going to get totally eaten up by your own curses. I'm a little bit lukewarm about this jewel. Then we have Jongrone's unique, which is Nimis, one of the more interesting uniques coming out this patch. It has a little bit of proj damage, some dexterity, and the big payoff here is projectiles return to you at the end of flight, and there's a little downside or upside depending on the build. Projectiles are fired in random directions. Now, in terms of fun, this definitely delivers already, but there has to be a lot of things tested out in order for us to know how good it really is. There has never really been an effect like this. Just to tell you that Vengeance Cascade is pretty much different, not as good, I would say. Attack projectiles return to you from final target, so it has to hit a target, and then it cannot pierce, and then it has to come back, right? So it's a lot more restrictive, as well as that this only works on attacks. The ring also works on spells. And Jong apparently confirmed that this does work for secondary projectiles, for example, like Tornado Shot or Eye of Winter. Now, I would say that if this is actually as broken as I think it is, it's going to be a complete no-brainer on those builds. But then again, this will need a lot of testing, but I'm sure he's going to do that in the first few days of the league. Then let's talk about some of the reworked uniques here at the end. First up, we have Adziri's Disfavor, which we had reworked quite a bit. Now, instead of granting +2 level of socketed support gems, first up, it now gives 30% to quality of socketed support gems. Also, something I want to point out is that all of these uniques are getting a ton rarer. So we don't know exactly. I know Chris said like T0 Headhunter rarity. I don't think all of these will be. Maybe some of them. We don't know exactly. Some of them are boss drops, so we just don't know. So all I'm trying to say is definitely don't plan your league starters around some of those. Now, just to show you some interesting things with extra quality. Extra quality is actually quite good in general, but there's 2 gems I want to talk about here in specific. The first one is Cast on Critical Strike, which has an anomalous version, which gives you 20% more attack damage. So if you have 50% quality, what you're going to get is 50% more attack damage. Now, this is not about proccing anything. This is only just a support skill for an attack-based build, right? 50% more attack damage is better than basically any support gem out there for attack-based builds. So that will just, number one, make Adziri's Disfavor already really strong, but then we also have Chance to Bleed's Divergent quality, which reads supported skills have more added damage, which also goes up to 50, right? So we have some really interesting stuff here for Adziri's Disfavor, but it doesn't stop there. It gets more physical damage. It also gets +10 weapon range. One thing I want to correct is I actually first said this doesn't work with Cyclone because of POB, but apparently it does. The way I thought it worked is it's actually base weapon range, and that doesn't affect Cyclone, and it doesn't even get the AoE, right, that gets converted. But apparently this does work with Cyclone. If it does, this might be a new GG for a huge AoE. Although don't discount this for strike skills for obvious reasons, because +10 weapon range is even stronger on some skills. The second one is Beano's Kitchen Knife. I don't really know about this change. I don't think a lot of attack-based builds really played this. So I don't think it really needed a physical damage enhancement. I think it needed more. Beano's is basically like spreading your poisons, and it was more used for some of the spell-based builds. Overall, even if it got buffed, and it might be worth on an attack-based build, I don't think it's good enough. Then we have the Bloodseeker Unique Claw, which just got like round about 25% more physical damage in general. If you don't know, Bloodseeker makes it so your leech is instant, which is quite damn strong. This is what Valpect used to do back in the day, but Leech kind of changed since then. So one thing you have to realize is that instant Leech is not just, you can't just from one hit go from 0 to 100% life anymore. One Leech instance can only give you 10% of HP, which isn't really that big of a deal because mostly claw builds are going to attack fast anyways. I'm just saying that this is more like 10% life gain on hit, right? So for example, if you had 5k life, you can kind of see it as 500 life gain on hit. Now, I don't really think this helps. If somebody wanted the effect before in endgame, they probably would have already used it. Nobody really wanted it. This small increase is not gonna really change that. Now, holy moly, Divinaria's got quite the buff. Now, talk about trying to compete with rare daggers. Rare spell daggers can be really rough to get +2 levels. You can get the same things that Divinarius get, but better. But now, it goes up to 200% increased spell damage. Previously 50 to 70. It gets AoE 30%, which is insane. And then also 100 to 200 life per enemy killed. This is incredibly strong, especially for builds that don't get onto the right side here and get Bloodbreaker, which is most spellcasters, so it fits perfectly. You also get mana on kill. It also gives up to 200% crit chance, 100% crit multiplier if you haven't killed Reese. Like, I don't even know. This might be incredibly rare. At the end of the day, I think in some builds, a perfect rare dagger will still overtake this, but just the pure quality of life with the life gain on kill and the AoE might make this an absurd chase unique. Also, I just want to point this out for people who kind of compared this to wands. You have to realize that rare daggers are way harder to roll, because even rune daggers are way harder to roll. So on builds that want to, for example, use whirling blades, or they just cannot use wands for some reason, this is going to shine even more. Then we have Essentia Sanguis, which I don't think is going to make the cut here. It has a lot of lightning damage, but competing with other claws is going to be quite hard still. It's just a very outdated unique in general. And when it comes to Energy Shield Leech, the main problem is always going to be the same. It's that Energy Shield Leech just isn't that good, because in base, you can only leech 10% of your energy shield per second, whereas life allows you to do 20. So even if you double that with something like Ghost Reaver, you're still only getting to where life was to begin with, and life can go Volpact. So I hope I'm wrong, but I just can't see any application for this. Kingmaker got buffed. Sure. I think this is going to be pretty concerning for minion builds in general, because apparently this is going to be a lot rarer, right? Also, because of Soul Taker, which we're going to see down below, which might be kind of awkward at League Start especially. Then we have Kitava's Feast, which, I mean, Melee Splash got from level 25 to level 30. I don't think this is going to change anything. Lioness Glare, I'm actually a little bit frustrated about, because this was a really good League Starter bow that you can buy for like 10 to 15C, and basically just forget that bows exist until you get to, like, I don't know, invitations, and then you kind of have to think about it again. It solved your accuracy problems. It got you far shot. I'm really upset because this is now a lot rarer. Now, obviously, it's stronger, but I still don't think it's strong enough for endgame, while now you don't have the bow anymore for early game, because it's going to be way too expensive and way too rare. I don't like this change. Now, I have the same feeling about Moroi Urki. It's very rare that this is getting used in endgame. It's usually just for some kind of League starters that don't want to scale attack speed for some reason. So those will just straight up lose Moroi Urki because it's going to be too expensive and too rare. But this increase doesn't really make enough of a difference, I think, to warrant it being rarer. I guess if there's like an endgame build with Moroi, it got buffed a little. Now, Savior, however, is a different story. Savior got buffed quite a bit. The thing about Savior is, ever since the dual wield changes, it was kind of left lacking. And now it basically got a lot more damage. And this is a boss drop, so even though it's going to be rarer, it's still not going to be like head-on to rarity. It cannot be, right? You just farm it over and over again. I don't think they're going to make it lower than like 1% or something. So overall, I think this is a good change. And this might actually incentivize dual wield builds and get them a little stronger again versus shield builds. Then we have Soul Taker, which got buffed a little as well. I don't think it's enough. The builds that ran Soul Taker already will run it again, and the builds that didn't will not all of a sudden run it now. Replica Soul Taker can no longer be obtained. Rest in pepperonis. Starforge is an interesting one. It got buffed to 400 to 450%, which is still not as much as it used to be, right? It could go up to 500 before it got nerfed down to 200 to 300. So it isn't exactly where it was back then. So they also made it rarer. We would have to see how rare exactly, because two-handed rare swords can actually be incredibly strong. So is it going to compare? I don't know exactly, but at least it's back, and now you have an easy unique fix for your 200 needs. Varanastra needed way more than this little bit of damage increase. If we look at Varanastra, what it needed the most is more attack speed. It's a sword with 1.3 attack speed, and especially with the passive tree change, I just cannot see Varanastra being good. And Varanastra was always kind of a trap. The problem is, with the passive tree rework, you always have enough damage nodes, or you have cluster jewels now, right? to actually facilitate as much damage as you want. It's more about getting defenses, right? That's actually a lot harder, getting enough HP. So yeah, being able to pick dagger nodes and sword nodes, it just isn't what it used to be. Kind of a bit. Now, the thing I'm probably the most hyped about is Voidforge. This buff is insane. Now, what they did is they removed the base damage, 30 to 60% increased physical damage, and instead, now, instead of 300% of a random element, it gives 700%. And I tried this on some Voidforge builds on PoE Ninja, and all I can tell you is that this will be around about 70 to 80% more damage, because obviously the loss of the increased physical damage is still something, but yeah, it's gonna almost double your damage, a little bit less. But yeah, Voidforge builds were already okay, and now they're a lot more. One downside of it being rarer, though, is a big thing about Voidforge was also, since it's a unique, you could buy it and try to corrupt it for Fortify, right? So if you didn't know, you can actually get Fortify on swords, which gives you a sort of 7 link, which is huge. You probably won't be able to do that anymore with how rare this weapon will be. And then at the end, Voltaxic Rift no longer has chance to shock, blah, blah. It has a ton more added damage. And I think this is mostly for, actually attack-based builds might run this, but also for something like Battle Mage maybe, sure. Most likely, I think this is better on attack-based builds. 100% of lightning damage converted to chaos damage, which can also kind of enable some sort of poison builds. Now, this is overall pretty strong. The thing is just that it's going to be incredibly rare. For example, people were asking me about my Caustic Arrow build. Is Voltaxic Rift going to be better than Darkscorn? Short answer is I don't know. I haven't really thought about it because I don't want to bait anybody into thinking this is going to be something they can get on League Start. But yeah, that's all of the uniques. Overall, I absolutely love the direction they went with the new uniques. The reworked one, give or take, some I like, some I don't. Overall, I think they actually screwed melee a little bit here even more because some builds were running Disfavor kind of like as an early league, right? It dropped from normal at 0. It was actually quite affordable. So they now will have to craft stuff. The same thing happened kind of for Maroi, Urki, and Lionized Glare. These were commonly used. However, I can't wait to play around with some of these uniques, and overall, I'm really happy with it. I hope I could give you some info on what's about to come in 3.20, and see ya. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, man, whenever one of these comes out, I'm thinking about new builds. I absolutely love what they did here. I wish they put as much care into their skill balance and maybe revamped some of the old ones, maybe buffed, right? I think the numbers would already be enough. But holy moly, like there's some absolute big hitters in here. I can't wait to try out the new league. And since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.